Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. Anthony Smith stands in the middle of the street, breathing in the clean spring air. Behind him with a dejected class. The gates of the colony have just slammed shut. The guy takes another deep breath and slings a small gray gym bag over his shoulder. Freedom, shouted out loud to Anthony, smiling to himself at how different that simple word sounded here outside the prison cell. Anthony wandered toward the bus stop, enjoying every step in his old, worn-out sneakers. He had been there for both the trial and the day of the event that had changed his life completely. Anthony wasn't a murderer or the first thief, but he had a complicated destiny under his belt, and it was only one wrong step that caused everything to fall into the abyss. Anthony Smith was about 23 years old. He was born in the most ordinary working-class family. His mother, Angelina, worked as a grocery store clerk. The boy had no father, and he knew nothing about him, as his mother did not want to talk about the subject. Instead, Anthony had a stepfather, Michael, a man of a complicated, even heavy character, not overly fond of alcohol. His mother tried her best to talk sense into her wayward husband, but to no avail. For a week he held on and even went back to the factory, where he managed to work a couple of shifts. And then it was all over again. Little Anthony often got a beating from his drunken stepfather, but he endured it. He was weak. And what's the truth? He was afraid. While he was sober, he could still communicate with him, but when he was drunk, Angelina tried to keep her son out of harm's way, but that rarely happened. Usually, Michael would start out drunk and wreck the furniture, overturning chairs and tables. On purpose, he would beat the soup he was cooking with his wife with a mug and throw Anthony's toys out the window. After that, it was as if the stepfather was possessed by a demon. The broken furniture did not seem enough to him, and he started pushing and kicking his mother. Of course, the boy stood up for his mother, even though he was frail and quite small. But he couldn't just stand there and watch or hide from everything in the room. And for that, he got it accordingly. The police did not interfere with the Smith family, as is usual in such cases. They made a couple of reprimands and threatened me with 15 days, but that's all right. So Anthony's mother never saw any help from the police. And she loved her Michael, in her own way, of course. That desperate woman's love when, because of age and circumstances, she had no hope of anything, but she did. Teachers in kindergarten often asked Angelina why her son has a black eye or bruises on his hand. In kindergarten, this did not happen. To what his mother always said that Anthony stumbled in the yard, or a bad bungee jump. She was a good woman, but she was too afraid of her alcoholic husband. Anthony only acquiesced. He didn't want to give his mother away. One day, an egregious incident happened in their family. Anthony had picked up a cute little kitten in the yard and named it Pushkoi. In another drunken stupor, the stepfather tried to throw the kitten out the window, as he had done with the boy's toys. Before that, Anthony couldn't let something like that happen, even at his 6 years of age. For the first time, he openly went at his stepfather with his fists. This was something Michael hadn't expected from his stepson. The boy pounced on him like a baby predator, hammering at him with his hands and feet. Although the grown man was 100 times stronger, he appreciated the boy's fury, and therefore the kitten was spared. True, in the evening, when his mother returned from work, she was badly hurt. The poor woman did not find out about the incident with the cat, and did not understand why her husband had beaten her again. But the next morning, he sobered up. Michael advised Angelina to take her son to a boxing class. You take care of him in you. You take care of him. You probably want him to grow up to be a woman, don't you? Meanwhile, the boy's got potential. Pure aggression. Oh! Stepfather shook his powerful fist in his wife's face. What's your point? My wife asked carelessly. If he's done something funny again, don't touch him. He is just a child. That's not what I meant. Michael brushed his wife off. We should get Anthony into sports. You know, he's a violent kid. We need to get his energy into the right direction. Angelina lifted her lips. She just didn't know how to respond to her husband's offer. And then you need the money for the section. Well, sport is certainly a good thing. She agreed. But what section do you propose to send him to? If figure skating, we can't afford it. I'm telling you, skates are insanely expensive. Stepfather's face slightly stretched out in frustration. What Angie skates? Michael lightly tapped his fist on his own head, alluding to his wife's stupidity. I'm telling you about wrestling. Boxing, a man should be raised, not a dancer. Angelina wondered, why would her husband give his stepson to wrestle? On the contrary, he's happy every time Anthony can't fight back because he's weak. Although she has long noticed that Michael is sober and Michael is drunk. Totally two different people. All right, we'll give Anthony that boxing. Who's going to pay? It's not cheap. The way my mother usually does. We'll take the money out of the family money, Michael simply replied, and pulled another bottle of vodka from under the kitchen table. Of the family. Heavy, sighed Angelina. So it's back to me to pay. Anthony, hiding in all this time around the corner and hearing every word from the adults, just pressed harder against his kitten's chest. Bonks. He couldn't believe that this was where they wanted him. After all, it was both great. And at the same time, it was scary. What if he didn't make it? What if he wasn't strong enough, like the other boys? He always had a bad complexion. That's what his mother acknowledged. But the fact that he was finally going to be taught to fight professionally felt good, warming the boy's soul. The next day was his mother's day off, and she took Anthony to a sports school a couple of blocks away from their house. The small brick building had been built a long time ago, but still seemed to be able to withstand anything for the boy. The wrestling section was in the basement, thinking it was in the basement. Seeing the other boys sparring, Anthony was dumbfounded with excitement. As a boy, he understood neither the moves nor the technique, but the smooth movements of the fighters mesmerized him, and sharp and clear blows made his tiny heart clutch sweetly. At the same time, he clutched his mother's hand tightly. That's what the head coach of the club, John Williams, noticed. Have you brought a new fighter? Why are you, mother, so clinging to your son, as if he was just about to be blown away? The coach laughed. Tough, tough, Uncle John. Scared the mother a little, but only at first. Later, she was even glad to have a man like Williams working with her son. Anthony really needed a normal male role model of a man better than a coach. She couldn't find one for Anthony in that regard. I brought my son to you. She began hesitantly. My husband said we should start the boy in sports as early as possible. The coach looked critically at Anthony. Then he looked at Angelina. Nothing good could be read in his eyes. Why didn't my father bring me here himself? It would have been easier to discuss everything. He works the factory shift, Anthony's mother lied, blushing like a beet. What's there to talk about? The boy wants to fight. He wants to defend his country, homeland. John looked at Anthony incredulously. And then he asked the boy himself, can you even do push-ups? 10 times for starters, of course I can do it. The boy shouted excitedly. Show me with a serious look, the coach suggested. The boy immediately let go of his mother's hand and lunged at his mother, intending to show him all he could. At this time, Williams took the boy's mother aside and asked quietly, are you sure you want your son to be a boxer? Don't get me wrong. I'll take him. But he's too skinny. Angelina just sighed. Look, I understand that the boy may not be a natural-born boxer, but could you at least try to train him? He'll be better off if you can keep him busy, and he'll come in handy as an adult. Doesn't the boy's father want to take care of him? Or is there no time? Asked the coach. Husband, we have a difficult situation at home right now. Angelina tried to explain. John stared at Anthony's mother for a few seconds before understanding flashed in his eyes. Well, let's see what we can do with your boy. Maybe he'll do some good. All this time, Coach Williams had been unnoticed by his mother watching her son. The briskly starting boy was exhausted by the sixth exercise and was now sitting, sweating and shaking from the strain in his lonely muscles. Not bad. The man decided to cheer the guy up a bit. You just need to exercise more and eat better. Then you'll gain muscle mass quickly. That's what you need in wrestling. The boy nodded weakly and smiled back. His heart was beating fast. His cheeks burned with an unaccustomed athletic blush. Come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock and we'll start then, the coach promised. The mother looked gratefully at the tall, muscular man, but immediately looked away. Now her boy would not be alone, the woman had time to think before Anthony ran happily up to her, embracing her with his worst arms. A year later, Anthony's mother was gone. A sudden heart attack caught Angelina right at work behind the store counter. Neighbors later chattered that the woman's heart failed because she found out about her husband's infidelity. As for his stepfather, he just ignored all these quibbles, calling his late wife's friend a stuffed-up perfume. Anthony had just turned 7. He was about to start first grade at school, but the boy was totally unprepared. He had no uniforms, no textbooks. Thank you, a kind-hearted friend of his mother's. They somehow took care of him and managed to get him ready for school. For pity's sake, the boy went to first grade with 3 gladioli and in an old snow-covered uniform, which he got from the shoulder of someone else's long-grown son. Anthony, however, did not complain. He was well aware that he was now alone with his stepfather and was immensely grateful to his mother for bringing him to the gym. Anthony had been practicing with Coach Williams for a year and had certainly gotten stronger since he had started. He was no longer so frail and could take a punch. And in his relationship with his stepfather, his new physical form came in handy. Michael, though he did not put Anthony in an orphanage, took pity on the boy, but he didn't stop drinking. He still, when he was irritated about something, his stepfather tried to take his anger and discontent out on the boy. Now, however, Anthony became more confident in his own abilities and could almost truly stand up for himself and his cat. One day the stepfather, being drunk, attacked the cat again, trying to kick the poor animal more painfully to spite Anthony in this way. The thing was that the boy forgot to set the alarm clock for a certain time, and he was late for work after another binge. The stepfather got even drunker and decided to take revenge on his stepson through a kitten. Wow! The creature had his tail waved in a fit of rage. A drunken man crawls that you'll give up eating everything. And on whose money do you live? To my, he eats with the money we get from the allowance, Anthony answered in place of Cannon, who managed to escape from the hallway straight into the kitchen. He'd just come back from training. You haven't brought home a penny this month. He just drinks it all away. The boy grabbed the cat from under his stepfather's feet and threw it out into the hallway, slammed the door. The animal was safe and meowed appreciatively. The stepfather's face turned white in an instant. What are you babbling about, puppy? The drunkard surged and swung his square fist at his stepson. But Anthony was ready with a sharp movement, disregarding his stepfather's menacing, spreading arms. The lad raised his own fist and delivered a well-measured blow to Michael's jaw. This is for your mother and Papushka. The boy grimaced. And don't you ever hit the cat again. When I'm out of the house, it'll be even worse, and you won't touch me again. For all his hatred of Michael, Anthony tried to retain what little civility his mother had left in her upbringing. However, to humiliate and raise his hand against himself or his pet, he would not allow anything like that to happen again as long as he lived in this house. When I grow up, I'll take my gun and finally get away from you, said the boy to him one last time, and you live here as you wish. The stepfather squeezed out, rubbing his ears with his long jaw. I should have put you in an orphanage right away. They would have taught you some sense there. Damn, I had to tell your mother to put you in boxing. Anthony just grinned. You think because I'm small I don't understand anything. You think I don't know that you didn't leave me because you love me so much. You paid for me as if I were adopted. If you'd given me to an orphanage then, you wouldn't have anything to drink on now. That's all." With these words, the boy left the kitchen and took his cat in his arms and closed in his room. As time went by, Anthony came of age unnoticed. The boy had turned 16 and was getting ready for his graduation. By this time, young Smith had become a promising young boxer in the junior league. Anthony became a strong, broad-shouldered, confident guy and continued to train, winning more awards for his sports school and coach's collection. Over the years, John became more like a father to Anthony. The young man not only shared his athletic accomplishments with Williams, but often sought his advice on matters of life. The boy trusted his teacher completely and never hid the fact that he was worried about his own future. In recent years, living under the same roof with his stepfather was simply unbearable. Williams, being aware of the boy's circumstances, unexpectedly offered to let him stay with him. Anthony was very pleased with this offer. How much longer can this droning drunkard be tolerated? John started the conversation. "I've got a big 3-bedroom apartment. I have a big apartment, 3 rooms. I think there's enough room for everyone." "Are you serious? With hope in your eyes?" Anthony asked again. "God, that would be so great. John, I'm speechless. Thank you. I promise I'm not embarrassed of you, honestly. But I've got a cat that's still fluffy. I can't leave my friend to that bastard. He'll throw him out the window. It's my revenge." Coach rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then smiled. "Do you know what to bring your cat?" "I only have flowers, though. But if you promise not to chew them, then I think we'll settle it with him." That same evening, Anthony threw a bag full of his unkempt belongings, clothes, and everything else. The boy had been buying with his competition money for a long time. And taking the cat under his arm, he went to live with his coach. The stepfather didn't even notice his stepson's disappearance, lying unconscious as usual. Anthony decided he would call him later and explain everything, especially since the boy didn't want to get into any conflicts with him now. He was too tired of those exhausting other people's tantrums and uncontrollable temper tantrums of Michael. So the 3 of them lived together, Anthony, John, and Fluffy, as Anthony later recalled, sitting in a cramped prison cell. Those were the best 2 years of his life. The kid remembered how, in one of his toughest fights, Coach Williams still believed in him and encouraged him. He wouldn't let him give up. To the left, come on." "Didn't Bearcat miss it?" shouted John Anthony, standing on the other side of the ring, remembering again what I taught you for so many years. Fragile out of sight always hits harder. "Why is that?" "Because he's meaner." Anthony had a tough time. He was a tough opponent. And even though they were both heavyweights, that guy had the build as if he was a born heavyweight. After taking some devastating blows to the body and head, Anthony was about to give up when his coach came to the rescue with his advice. Anthony Smith won that fight, becoming the youngest middleweight champion of his region. Unfortunately, that was the last time he fought professionally under John. In fact, it was the last time he saw his trainer alive. Did trouble come when it wasn't supposed to? One night, when the coach was returning home from the club, he was hit at full throttle by an expensive foreign car. Some rich scumbag was driving it. The worst part is, the culprit was never found. They must have paid him off. That's what Anthony thought, the day he identified in the morgue. John's living body became the blackest day of his life, on par with the day his mother died. The coach of the entire athletic school was buried. Williams had not only raised a dozen champions in it over the years, but he was just a really good man, a true friend and mentor to the kids who decided to dedicate their lives to the sport. After the wake, Anthony wanted to pack up and leave right away, when he unexpectedly found a letter in his mailbox with a summons for a boy in the draft board. A bright blur of khaki color loomed over the army. And so it was that in his 18 years, Anthony had experienced some real family tragedies and eventually ended up in an army barracks. The days flowed in one endless succession, in which endless patrols of service, and military theories alternated every day at the same hour. The Army's strict discipline, on the one hand, was to Anthony's liking. In a way, it helped distract him from his dark thoughts of the past. Very soon, however, the monotony of barracks life grew more and more depressing for Anthony's young soul. If one day he hadn't met Megan on his way, she was a part-time economics student in the same city where Anthony lived. The young people met quite casually. The girl was in a hurry to catch a bus, but she was late. Anthony was just passing by in a service truck. He had been sent into town to pick up provisions for the Army kitchen. "Can the girl give you a ride?" Smiling, the young soldier asked the student. "I would like to take the bus, of course." But as it happened, Megan answered uncertainly. Anthony hastened to reassure her. "Don't worry, I'm stationed nearby. I sent the commander to town to get some groceries. I won't do anything to you." Lieutenant's words. The student pondered the guy's offer for a few seconds until he eloquently looked at his own watch. Time was ticking, he said. "It's up to the darling to decide." "All right, in the end," Daria agreed. "I was in the middle of an accident, but I was not going to get into a car accident. We don't want to get into an accident." "Yes," Comrade Commander jokingly placed his hand visor over Anthony's uniform cap. Then he left. Megan laughed, too, at her own ostentatious sternness. Later, when they were on their way, she apologized for her tone. "You'll excuse me for being so harsh. It's kind of a deformity, and it's generic. My parents teach philosophy at the university, and my dad's dad is a famous historian of old people. Maybe you've heard of him? Maybe I have," Anthony replied, smiling enigmatically. He really liked the girl, so he didn't want to lie outright. "Well, here we are," Megan said sadly. "When did the soldier drop her off at the house?" "Thanks for the ride. I'd still be standing at the bus stop waiting for the next bus." At that moment, Anthony realized it was time to make a decisive move. It was now or never. "Excuse me, Megan." They had already met while they were chatting about this and that on the road. "How would you feel about going to the local movie theater next weekend? I hear there's a big premiere coming up. We could watch it together and discuss it over coffee and ice cream afterwards." Megan pretended to think about it, though in fact she was pleased with the offer made by the young military man. Perhaps the future colonel was the kind of girl who liked to be appreciated. "If it's not an action or horror movie, then you can watch it," the student answered evasively. "I don't like it when everything explodes on the screen or vice versa, just bloody rivers everywhere." Megan gracefully embarrassed her little nose. "No, it's historical," Anthony said lightheartedly. "I promise if there are any explosions, they'll be very moderate." As a result, the young men spent the next weekend together. Anthony managed to take 2 days off. The boy and the girl quickly found common ground. Anthony liked the intelligence and sophistication of the fragile Megan, or even the other way around. She was very sympathetic, a little primitive, ancient, as she herself called Anthony's strength. To her, he was a kind of selfless, protective knight, ready to fulfill any wish of a beautiful lady, whatever was that wish. The further Anthony realized that he was crazy about his Megan, the couple was constantly corresponding, exchanging photos at the same time. Both liked this kind of romance in letters, a bit reminiscent of the young people's relationship style from old Soviet movies. Megan constantly wrote to her boyfriend about how much she loved and waited for him, and how slowly time was dragging on when they couldn't be together. Sometimes they did manage to see each other. Usually it was on rare layoffs. Even then, the couple never parted for a moment. Anthony and Megan had become so one, though their romance developed mostly at a distance that the girl even asked to leave the institute from important classes, all to support his beloved at the swearing-in ceremony. Anthony was just glowing with honor then, even more so when he speaks the words of defense of the motherland in a beautiful way. And Megan is so small, skinny, looking at him with admiring eyes from the front row, along with the other guy's brides. In the evenings, before he went to bed, His co-workers would beg Anthony to read them some of the letters Megan had sent him, although the content of their correspondence was sometimes very intimate. Anthony still chose the places where the girl described her feelings to her boyfriend with great beauty and sublimity. At some point, Anthony and Megan realized that they wanted to be together officially. And so the young people decided that as soon as the guy's service was over, they would get married right away, despite the fact that they were both young. Anthony hadn't even met Megan's parents yet. It seemed to the couple that all of life's difficulties and issues were bound to clear up once they were close to each other once and for all. Anthony had accumulated under his mattress a weighty stack of letters from Megan, which he periodically reread on short soldiers' evenings, when another successful day of service marked the time before the cherished bedtime. There was little personal time left. 6 months before Anthony was to be discharged to the reserve, everything changed dramatically. All of a sudden, out of the blue, Megan stopped sending letters. At first, the guy thought that something happened at the post office, some kind of malfunction, because of which the cherished envelope could not reach him. But the other guys continued to receive messages from their friends and relatives, so it clearly wasn't the postal service. Anthony became very worried. Had something terrible happened to his sweetheart? Or maybe it was her family. Maybe something had happened to Megan's father. Especially lately, the girl had been complaining to her fiancé that he was having increasingly frequent problems with his heart. The guy asked the unit commander for permission and started calling the girl regularly, first on her home phone and then on her cell phone. For some reason, no one came to the home number. But on the cell phone, Anthony was horrified to hear the voice of an electronic answering machine telling him that the number had been misdialed. After humbling himself with a piece of paper from his notepad where he'd put Megan on the phone, Guy made sure there could be no mistake. The number was indeed correct. Anticipating trouble, Anthony immediately hung up the phone. With trembling hands, he folded the sheet of paper with the number on it. The boy was confused. He did not know what to do now. In the end, his friends advised him to wait for demobilization and then to go to Megan's and find out everything on the spot. Maybe something really did happen. Don't worry, Anthony. They might have moved the whole family out of the neighborhood. Yeah, I can't say anything. Bitter, the young soldier grinned. No, that doesn't sound like Megan. And her parents were intelligent. If something had happened to her with me, my friends would only let me know. They couldn't tell a friend their most recent and most obvious assumption. Anthony might have just gotten fed up with Megan and she dumped him. The day the service finally came to an end was forever pronounced in Anthony's subcortex. The sky was covered with leaden gray clouds, from which a cold blue downpour soon poured. Anthony didn't have an umbrella, so the guy had to cover himself with his own jacket to keep his breath in. Once outside the unit, he immediately sprinted toward the cottage, trying to keep up with the width of the military step. Anthony's heart, too, seemed to run at a gallop, unaware of the huge puddles. The lad crossed faster and faster through the familiar streets in the large park with its tall, somber vases, where the young people so loved to stroll during their rare encounters. At last Smith found himself near the tall, beautiful house in which his fiancée lived. The house had been built recently, so the yard around it and the interior of the newer one was spacious by the entryway. What struck the boys was their brilliance and purity. Surprisingly enough, in all the time of his relationship with Megan, Anthony has never been a guest of hers. What's the big deal? Not even into the entryway. The girl explained this by the fact that she has very strict and conservative parents. Seeing their daughter with a strange man, they could easily put her under house arrest. Unless, of course, Megan gave them convincing evidence that her chosen one had come to their home with the most serious intentions. Anthony joked that they'd have to meet after the service anyway. Megan responded that it was better to wait a little. Apparently, she wanted to prepare her parents so that the moment of getting acquainted would be perfect. Who do you want? The concierge behind the large reception desk asked him sternly. The plump woman was looking at Anthony through the thick lenses of her glasses. Megan Miller still lives in apartment 78. Can you tell me? I remembered the address of the young man where the old man used to send letters back to his beloved. Who will you be? Unfaithful? Lana asked back. My name is Anthony Smith. I am Megan's fiancé. Anthony answered calmly, and his heart was pounding. It was about to burst out of his chest. The shift, the concierge's face held still with the same incredulous expression, and then promptly began to sprawl in a smile for a second. From her thickly colored lips came a loud, unconcealed laugh of frank contempt. Groom, you, the woman said with a gasp of laughter with difficulty. What's so funny? Did Anthony boyishly exclaim. No. What are you, sick? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Wiping away tears half smeared with mascara worked the concierge. It's just that you showed up late. Megan, you've been married for 3 months. And she's not Miller anymore. She's Garcia. Anthony felt all the blood rush from his face, his lips refusing to listen, but he still managed to say Megan was married. He didn't remember flying up the stairs to the 6th floor, or the concierge yelling something hurtful at him. The guy quickly figured out that the apartment had to be on about the 6th and 7th floor, and he was not mistaken. He slid into the spacious hallway of the stairwell. Anthony saw with his own eyes Megan herself emerge from the door of her apartment, and with her the man who, apparently, could be considered the girl's husband. A lifeline had definitely broken off inside the guy. All the thoughts that had kept him on the surface all this time and had given him any remnants, calm irrationality, were swept away, a bitterly salty wave of rage. Resentment and misunderstanding feelings flooded Anthony dark deep waves, not giving him a chance to surface. Megan, he whispered, how could you? How could you do this to me? Megan is with us, as thin and beautiful as the day they first met. With huge, frightened eyes, she looked at her former fiancé. Beside her towered a tall, thin guy, outwardly a little older than the girl. Expensive sunglasses and several gold rings on his skinny fingers. And the now fashionable Spaniards passed her husband off as a lover of nightclubs and a fashionable party girl. Judging by his garish outfit, Anthony was just another rich kid of rich parents who did not earn anything in this life, but got everything for free. And the guy looked at Anthony and Megan with bewilderment. Yes, he said questioningly, looking at his wife. Who's that? And what the hell is he talking about? Megan frightenedly grabbed the thin man by the arm. Nothing, Bob. Nothing. It's an old acquaintance of mine. We went to college together, and then he was expelled. Anthony couldn't believe his eyes. So it's true. On the ring finger of her left hand, Megan wore 2 gold rings at once. One classic, and the other by the milk with a large yellow stone, similar to a diamond. The girl deliberately raised her hands so that Anthony could see them and understand everything. I told you so, Anthony whispered sorrowfully. I can't understand how you could choose it over me. The guy pointed at the major as if he had a nasty insect in front of him. You wouldn't understand, Anthony, Megan stammered. Bob is something else entirely. Well, yes, the ex-fiancé agreed. Bob is different. It's money, luxury. The expensive clubs I couldn't take you to, the poor soldier. And I probably never would have because I needed a family, not this. Anthony looked at Megan in disgust. Suddenly the husband himself intervened in the conversation. I don't understand. What's your problem with my wife? Who are you? He seriously decided to find out what was going on. So he took off his sunglasses. Who am I? Yes, I'm her fiancé, Anthony said with a bitter smile. We wanted to get married. We loved each other. And then I don't know where you came from. Only upset, I guess, our wedding. Yes, Megan sarcastically addressed the guy to the frustrated bride. There was an awkward pause. It was like Megan was frozen in place. She hid behind her husband, who didn't say a word. He was still staring at Anthony. Finally, Bob must have thought of something and moved slowly toward his hardy rival. Here's the groom, he began dismissively. I don't care what happened to the girl before me. Only now she's with me. I get it. We're on a first-name basis, spelled Major. You were in your stinking barracks. Did you ever think about what you could give her? A room in a communal apartment? A vacation at the seaside once every 5 years? Is that what you wanted for Megan? What I wanted you don't need to know, Anthony snapped. Before he knew it, his body had adopted the familiar boxing stance, and his fists darted into the air. Only you and your kind ruined the lives of good people forever. Are you the good one? Bob laughed scornfully. You're an underdeveloped pauper. Get out of here before they call security. Aunt Emma's probably told the police about you by now. They'll be here in a minute to pack you up. Anthony had no memory of what happened next. His body reacted before he could get himself under control. He pounced on the skinny Bob and began to punch him indiscriminately, one after another, just as he had done in the ring. Through a black veil of rage, Anthony could hear Megan's screams of rage and her pleas to stop beating her disgusting husband. Soon he felt someone's strong arms enter him. It was the police, who had indeed been summoned by the suspicious concierge. Anthony's skin was pierced by powerful electric shocks. The boy only remembered how all his muscles involuntarily began to contract, and then there was complete darkness. Anthony Smith was sentenced to 3.5 years in a medium security penal colony under the article causing grievous bodily harm, with the possibility of extending the sentence to 10 years in the event that the victim does not come out of her coma. Just like that, Anthony managed to send Bob into a complete knockout. The young rich man's frail health could not withstand the boxer's blows, and the young man was between life and death. Megan was not on the judge's bench. She spent all that time in the regional teaching hospital beside her spouse. Had she ever loved Anthony on principle? That was a question the boy couldn't give himself a definite answer to. The one thing he was sure of for sure was that he would never see Megan again. Every night, lying on the hard prison bunk, Anthony berated himself for not being able to restrain himself. He'd say something scathing in response to the mockery of the big guy and walk away proudly so that Megan would be ashamed, so that she could understand what she had traded her womanly happiness for. But what had been done, alas, could not be undone, and so each subsequent night spent in the cage, the guy seemed even longer than the previous. 2.5 years later, he did get out on parole. By that time, Bob had long since recovered. Fortunately for Anthony, he did not ask for an extension of his sentence. The investigator later explained to Anthony that Bob's father was a big-shot deputy, and he simply did not want to bring up this whole mess with the charges again, especially since this deputy was up for re-election. As he approached the bus stop, Anthony thought about how he was going to live and what he was going to live and what he was going to do. He did not want to go home. Surely in his home country, he had already become a notorious celebrity. The notoriety that had overtaken the lad at such a young age had badly damaged both his professional and personal reputation. Hardly anyone in their small town would be happy to have a comeback from a sitting boxer. Neither would his stepfather be thrilled about living with his stepson, a convict. In the last letter Anthony sent to his only relative, he made it clear that he didn't want to share a place under the same roof with Anthony again, or even see him. In addition, Michael had already drank himself to death. The neighbors and friends of his late mother wrote Anthony that the bastard had not long to live. At least some of the familiar surroundings didn't turn their backs on Anthony, but the guy realized that none of them would be willing to welcome an ex-convict into their home either. Climbing on the bus, Anthony Smith made a difficult decision for himself, but as he thought at the time, the right one. The guy planned to finally break the ties with his past and try to start a whole new life. So his way was not to the middle of nowhere in the countryside, but to the capital itself. At first, Anthony was not welcomed in the city. For a long time, the boy could not find a job, and there was nothing surprising about that. As soon as an employer found out Anthony's criminal record, he was immediately shown the door. Nevertheless, there were those who wanted not only to make fun of the ex-convict, but also to outright cheat. The first time this happened was when Anthony managed to get a job at the city taxi company. The guy was excited at first. The money was promising and he drove pretty well too, so the former boxer had no doubt that he would quickly master the wisdom of a metered wagon. After a few shifts, however, he was totally disappointed. It turned out that most of the proceeds had to be given to the senior brigade, and what was left was barely enough to buy bread and mineral water. But we agreed that 60s of the proceeds go to the driver. Anthony continued to insist. Why should I only get 30? It's pure robbery. You would have complained a little less and worked a little more. Maybe you'd make some money, huh? The foreman said quietly, thinking I didn't know you'd just gotten out of jail. Are you glad you got the job at all? Or do you want it back? Haven't you done enough time in the slammer? He threatened Anthony. As a result, the poor guy left the motor pool with paltry wages and even lower self-esteem. Of course, he knew that he would not be dealt with in such a place. They'd set him up and be done with it, and Anthony never wanted to go back to the zone again. Luck smiled on him for the second time, when he managed to get a job as a janitor in a large supermarket. For the first couple of months, everything was going well, until the director of the store accidentally found out the fact that his best storekeeper had recently left. This time, Anthony prudently concealed a criminal record and could not even imagine how this information could suddenly surface. But unfortunately, he was immediately fired. So the guy didn't even have time to explain anything to the management. Anthony rented a small room on the outskirts of town. The money he earned at the store was just enough to pay the landlady, a nice old lady named Olivia. And the next installment was for the month. The guy lived very poor, but managed to keep his last dignity and not get homeless. I'm afraid, Olivia, that this is my last month with you, Anthony said sadly. And ladies to an old woman for money, what are you, grandson? How could it be so? Sincerely surprised the old woman. She knew Anthony's history and did not condemn him. After all, he had a right to defend his own honor against that rich man. Olivia herself had lived alone for a very long time. Her only son died in a terrible accident when he was not even 20 years old. The mistress of the old apartment liked Anthony at once. And after she got to know him better, she really liked him. When she found out that her tenant had been fired again, Olivia just waved her hand. Calm down, Anthony. You don't have to go anywhere. Stay here. Sooner or later, you'll find a good job. You'll see. There'll be good people who won't look at your past. And I'm not so scared with you. You can see how dysfunctional our neighborhood is, and I'm tangled up in it. The old lady convinced the boys. Anthony thanked the woman heartily and promised her that as soon as he found a job, he would immediately give her all the money for his forced downtime. Olivia only smiled as she listened to the young man's fervent promises. You see, she didn't take him in for the money. He reminded her very much of her untimely son. One evening on his way back from another job interview, Anthony saw a dog lying motionless near the parking lot. As he got closer, he heard the poor animal's pitiful whimpering. It turned out that its front paws were broken. Someone must have missed her and ran her over, driving out of their parking spot, and didn't even help the bastards. The dog was young, almost a puppy, a mongrel day shunned. Small black eyes constantly looking around, exposing whites and spring velvet ears. Hear that? As if from an unseen wind, the dog was nervous, not knowing what to expect from the strange man bowing her injured leg. Anthony decided to take the doggy home with him. He and Olivia together were able to rename the whining about the animal's paw. But they did take her to the vet the next day. Fortunately, it turned out there was no bone damage. The dog had a bad sprain and a couple of bruises on her body, but this turned out to be correctable with proper care and rest. Olivia was very excited to find out her new pet and everything was going to be okay. She named the dog. It turned out to be a girl, Sausage. Her fur was an amazing red-brown color, and her tight tummy resembled the famous meatloaf. And so they began to live together, Anthony, Olivia, and Sausage. After a couple of weeks, Anthony managed to get 2 part-time jobs at once, as a longshoreman and a night watchman at a pulp mill. Like his new acquaintance had said, there were finally people who didn't care about his past. They wanted, first and foremost, a responsible worker, which Anthony was. One day, on his way back from his shift at the factory, Anthony witnessed the terrible scene outside a fancy pink sports car at a nightclub. 3 large men tried to molest a young but completely drunk girl. Her short, gold-trimmed dress was dangerous, showing off her tanned thighs, and one of the thugs was panting strangely, trying to grab her legs tighter, while the other 2 were already examining the contents of her purse for the car keys in it. Anthony stopped, realizing that the rich hottie appeared to be the victim of the usual burglars, stalking their drunken nightclub victims. But here was the intention of the third one, who blatantly pawed the girl Anthony did not like at all. "Hey, you." "Yes, yes, you," the guy called out and nodded when they finally took their minds off their victim. "Would you leave the girl alone? Can't you see she's in no mood to talk to you?" The other man, unsuccessfully trying to find the keys in the girl's purse, leaned dangerously in, looking at Anthony. "Boy, you better get out of here. Can't you see the grown-ups are busy with their work?" "That's right, the bouncer and the drunken hottie are up against the wall." "Is that so?" "You're my wife and we're having a moment of passion." Now all 3 of them laughed loudly, and the girl, obviously aroused by the loud sounds, became inarticulate. Anthony knew he was taking a great risk, but to leave a defenseless and unhinged maiden at the mercy of those powers. He would never forgive himself for that. Not wanting to continue this pointless conversation, Anthony quickly ran up to the most powerful of them all. He was just holding the girl and gave him his signature right hook. The bully groaned and bent in half, but didn't let go of his victim. The second robber flew up to Anthony and quickly gave him a complex combo of several uppercuts and low blows. Anthony, frankly, didn't expect to face an equally strong opponent, so he was a bit taken aback. This was immediately taken advantage of by the third. The third one, who had been on the lookout before, struck Anthony hard and sharp blow to the head. A fierce fight ensued. Anthony fought back as best he could. He knew that if he gave up now, the girl would die or worse. A seasoned boxer, he gave the 3 criminals all the punches his favorite trainer had taught him, slyly dodging another punch. It was as if Anthony could hear John's voice in his head. "Lower, lower. Sag. That's how you do it. Sharper, sharper. They won't wait. Hit them in the ribs. Hit them in the ribs." Finally, the police and ambulance arrived at the scene of the fight. They were called by a janitor who witnessed the incident. The 3 bastards were immediately tied up by the police SWAT team. Anthony was taken to the trauma unit. Though a seasoned fighter, he sustained several serious injuries, including a couple of broken ribs and a concussion. Nevertheless, the guy was glad. He had managed to save a rich stranger, which meant his life would be one more good day. Except that the rich girl's savior was never given the proper treatment. Because of Anthony's lack of money, he had to settle for just priority assistance with transportation and a long list of necessary medications. The boys were discharged from the hospital the very next day. The chief physician, with a changing smile, personally asked him to make room. "Anton, you understand that we can't keep you here for more than a couple of days." "I understand," Anthony nodded. What else was he supposed to do? Could I at least call a cab to get home? The head doctor agreed. She felt sorry for the guy who had saved the majorette while she was recovering from the huge dose of alcohol she had drunk the night before. He, a simple worker, had risked himself to save her life. The woman paid for Anthony's cab and wished him a speedy recovery. When he returned home and listened to an angry tirade from Olivia, whom he had not had time to warn about the hospital, Anthony lay down for a while in his room. He needed to come to his senses and think about what had happened. A couple of days later, a big black business car drove up to Olivia's house. A man in an expensive dark suit got out and made a sign to his security guard to wait for him at the entrance. He went up to the old woman's apartment. Olivia was just feeding sausage when the doorbell rang. Standing in front of her was James Brown, one of the most influential businessmen in the capital, whose daughter, it turned out, had been saved by Anthony the other day. Asking permission to see the young man, James cautiously made his way to his room. Olivia brought her guest some tea and then quietly walked out. Sausage steam was taken out for a morning walk. After thanking the surprise boy for saving his wayward daughter, Brown decided to move on to the main purpose of his visit. Tell me, Anthony Rubin, is it true that you were recently released from a place not too long ago, and you've already been in several places in our city? I'm talking about the cab company and the warehouse and the supermarkets. Yeah, I just got out a little while ago, he answered honestly. And how did you find out about it? It's true that I tried to work in a cab and as a storekeeper. But I didn't steal anything and I didn't cheat anything. And I didn't cheat anybody. Brown smiled a little into his thick mustache. Well, about the first one, I have, pretty good connections in the police. So I know a lot of things. But the second one, good for you for not lying. I need honest people right now. Tell me about it, the businessman asked. What were you in jail for? Anthony told him his simple story, after which the businessman was silent for a while. But then he said, "Thanks for what you did. It wasn't so bad. In fact, to be completely honest, I would have done the same thing in your place," Brown reported. "The only mistake you made was hitting that fool too professionally. You should have hit him gentler. Then maybe he wouldn't have gone to jail at all. What's there to talk about the past?" Anthony responded intelligently. "I wish I knew where to lay the straw." "And that's true," agreed the businessman, and hastened to close the subject, seeing how it displeases Anthony. Then, after talking a little about life, Brown suddenly turned to the guy with a very unusual request. For the first seconds, Anthony even thought the businessman was joking. "Here's the thing, Anthony. I see you're a good guy. Not a thief, not a murderer, not a rapist. You're a good fighter, too. That's all I really need from you. Listen, Anthony," the businessman confided in him. "Help me with my daughter. Elizabeth is completely out of control. She doesn't listen to me. God, how can I help you here?" Anthony was amazed. "So she stopped listening to me." "Vulture," Brown continued. "She's got her word. She's got me 10. I tell her to stop with the clubs and get wise. She's my only life, Dad. I have to try everything in it. So I tried everything." "Ugh," the businessman spat in anger. "I heard that. It even sounded like Elizabeth had started dabbling in illegal substances. That's the last thing I need. I need a guard for her. And a trustworthy man, so that I don't have to represent anybody. You have no idea. No one can handle her. So I thought. And maybe you can do it. You understand, I do not trust these newfangled guards and bodyguards from private agencies. They will gather some dirt in passing, so then they'll have to pay for it too. And you're like a man of the people will be simple, but at the same time with sense. The money will not hurt. I give you my word as a businessman." "You have to think about it," Anthony responded to that speech. "You can't answer that right away. And I need to heal, to heal, to heal, to heal." "Think about it," Brown nodded. "I'll leave you my card with my phone number. Whenever you think of anything, call me." Before he left, the man turned around one more time. "You understand I can't keep track of it all by myself. My business is around, the clock stress of a contract deal, and my daughter threw in the joy." "I heard you," James smiled back at Anthony. "I'll think about your offer. I promise." The businessman nodded. He said goodbye once more and left. Anthony thought it over and finally decided it was worth a try in a couple of weeks. Once he felt much better, Anthony called the number on Senchenko's business card and agreed to be a security guard for his daughter. "Thank you, Daddy. That's a nice gesture. Elizabeth was hysterical when she found out that her father had assigned Anthony as her new guard. "What did I tell you? That boy will be your shadow from now on. Where you go, he goes." And that without a word I was shouted back by a businessman, furious with his daughter's stubbornness. "In case you've forgotten, dear daughter, Anthony saved your life and honor. When you fell out of the club to the point where you didn't even know what was going on around you." "I didn't ask for that," Elizabeth retorted sarcastically. "You could have got away with it. And what a knight you are." To say that Anthony and Elizabeth's acquaintance had not gone well from the beginning was an understatement. The young majorette, and she was barely 20, managed to drive her new security guard in a day to the point where he just wanted to silently drop everything and leave, to work back as a night watchman or a longshoreman. Sometimes a girl would purposely mock her boyfriend all day long, making him walk with her through endless malls and beauty salons. He saw with his own eyes how she wasted unprecedented amounts of money on some dresses and shoes, buying up huge quantities of them. Anthony could only dream of such money. But the guard was patient, and gradually his patience was rewarded. Elizabeth got used to the guy, became softer to him, especially after he got her out of several difficult encounters. So one day Elizabeth took too much of some substances, and she took a real overdose. Anthony was terrified. He managed to find a private clinic nearby. After that, she promised him that she would stab him with the drugs if he did not tell his father anything. To the girl's surprise, Anthony kept his promise. Elizabeth was truly touched by this devotion, and she too tried to cut down on her use of stimulants as much as possible. After a while, she even made an appointment with a druggist. Secretly from her father, of course, to get completely cured of her addiction. Another time Anthony managed to stop an intrusive admirer from the Golden Youth. The stalker, it turned out, had been stalking Elizabeth for months. Anthony had a manly conversation with the guy and clearly explained to the native of the local elite that the girl should be left alone. Just as in the previous case, Anthony said nothing to Elizabeth's father. He wasn't much of a talker at all, and he really liked girls. The young men themselves did not realize at what point their feelings for each other had taken hold of their heads. Elizabeth suddenly realized that her affection for the silent guard was much deeper and more sensual than it should have been. Anthony simply realized that he could not imagine his life without the feisty but so defenseless Elizabeth. For a long time, Elizabeth and Anthony had to hide their feelings from James. The girl was afraid that his reaction might be unpredictable. "You see, he's very strict with me," she told Anthony. "He raised me alone and used to control everything. My mother died of leukemia when I was very young and grew up. I decided that if I was brash, brave, never let anyone say a word, I would only stand my ground. Then the disease would never dare take me away from my father the way it did my mother. All my life I have had this fear that I could also get sick. No one is going to take James away from me," Anthony promised her, hugging her gently. "Just give up all your bad habits for good and everything will be different. You'll see, and your father will calm down. You'll see, and your father will calm down. He'll know that you don't have to keep him under the hood all the time. Trust me. One wrong decision can turn a man's whole life upside down. And if you make those decisions every day, and it's like walking through a minefield, you never know when and where it's going to blow up." And Anthony told Elizabeth the whole story of his life and mistakes. Standing Guy's almost 3 years of normal life. After that, it was as if Elizabeth had been replaced. Every day, the girl learned to control herself better and better, to gradually tame her inner demons and thus deserve the respect and praise of her father and her lover. But that was not the only reason for Elizabeth's sudden change. James began to pay attention to the fact that for the last couple of months his daughter had been feeling uncomfortable, vomiting in the morning, and texts as if she had been drinking all night, although there was no smell of alcohol. At first her father was afraid that Elizabeth had caught leukemia, which had taken her mother's health in a short time. But then he had another far more prosaic hunch. What do you mean pregnant? Brown raged, calling Elizabeth and Anthony to the carpet. When did you have time? You're a good goose, too. The businessman turned to the guard. I'm an old fool, I was glad. I thought my daughter was finally in good hands. And then, Daddy, I'm pregnant with Anthony's baby. The businessman mocked his own daughter. Then he calmed down a bit and asked the young people, when are you planning your weddings? Don't think I'm going to let it all slide. I'll let it go like that. Oh, Elizabeth, you're a sly one. Anthony and Elizabeth exhaled in relief. They both knew that Brown, though a strict man, stern even. But his heart had always been big and kind. And of course, for his daughter, he lived only for good. Since she had chosen a guy like Anthony to be her husband, so be it, especially since he managed to set the girl on the right path. Using Anthony's story as an example, Elizabeth understood very well how valuable the life we have here, and now is, and how dangerous it is to balance on the edge. A month later, the young people were married. It was one of the brightest and most memorable capital weddings, with a huge cake and a mass of invited guests. Of course, Olivia was there too. Later, Elizabeth and Anthony took the woman and her dog to their own home, where a few months later they brought their newborn Peter, their mutual son. James turned out to be absolutely thrilled with his grandson. He adores him and is already planning to send him to the International School of Economics. Anthony himself, thanks to the protection of his father-in-law, was able to open his own security agency in the capital, which only takes people after a personal interview. Most of all, the ex-convict boxer wants his employees to remain, above all, good and reliable people who can be unconditionally trusted. As for Elizabeth, she has permanently abandoned all her bad habits and is now engaged in the education of her son, as well as building around his and Anthony's home its own and, of course, unique landscaping.